Okay, so hello there. My name is Mudassir, and welcome to this lecture. So, this lecture is on Identity Access Management, which is often referred to as IAM. Right. So, what is IAM? So, IAM allows you to manage the users and their level of access within your AWS platform. And it's important to understand IAM and how it really works both from the exam perspective. So if you're looking to crack the exam, it's important. And even if you're looking to administer a company's AWS account, in that case as well, it's very, very important. Right. So basically, if you're going to use AWS, you need to understand IAM, because IAM allows you to set up the users, the groups, the permissions, and the roles. Right. So basically, it allows you to grant access to the different parts of the AWS platform. So it's basically very important to understand, because whatever services you're going to use, they'll basically in some way or the other be linked to IAM, right? So some of them in some way or the other are basically going to be linked with IAM. So it's very crucial and very important to know this service, right? So whatever things I mentioned, like the roles, the users, the policies, I know it might not be basically, you might not be aware about these things, but we'll talk about all these things as we progress in the course, right? So let's first understand what are the key features of IAM, right? So Identity Access Management offers the following features. It gives you centralized control of your AWS account. So this is basically a centralized place wherein you can control who has access to what within your AWS account. And it also gives you shared access to your AWS account, right? Um, it gives you granular permissions. So you can say, okay, I want people to access this service, but I don't want people to be able to access that service, right? So that you can achieve with the help of IAM, basically, right? So you can give permissions at a very granular level, right? So one particular person, he has access to one particular service within the AWS account, but the same person, the same user, doesn't have access to any other resource, right? So you basically control who has access to what at a very granular level within AWS with the help of IAM. And it also gives you identity federation. What do we mean? What do we mean by that? So basically, it's just it just means that you can use Active Directory, or you can use Facebook, or you can use LinkedIn with identity access management, right? So potentially your users could log into the AWS console using the same username and password that they use to log into their, let's say, their Windows PC, right? So this it's like kind of a single sign-on that they use to log in to their AWS account, right? So they don't have to have a separate username and all those credentials separately for the AWS account. Using the identity federation, they can log in using the Active Directory, using their own already existing credentials, right? So that's just using Active Directory. Or it could also mean that your end users, let's say you have developed a mobile gaming application or something of that sort, right? And it's storing information on AWS, right? And they can do that using their Facebook credentials or LinkedIn credentials, etc., etc. So they can basically log into their uh, 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 app using the Facebook credentials or LinkedIn credentials, Gmail credentials, whatever you basically allow them to do. IAM also gives you multi-factor authentication. So this means whenever you are logging into the AWS management console, you need a username, you need a password, right? Apart from that, if you enable multi-factor authentication, what that is we'll have a look at this later on, but I'm just going to give you a high-level understanding of what it is. So basically, apart from the username and a password that you require to log into your AWS account, if you enable multi-factor authentication, after that you'll then need a special code in order to log in, just like an OTP that you have, right? And basically this multi-factor authentication, it can be a physical hardware that you possess, or it can be even an app that you download from the App Store or from the Play Store, right? So it's like Microsoft Authenticator is there, Google Authenticator is there. So these are some of the popular authenticator applications that there are. So you link that authenticator app with your account, and whenever you try to log in, your users try to log in, for whom the multi-factor authentication has been enabled. Apart from the username and password that they key in, after that they'll have to basically, from that authenticator, they'll have to key in that additional special code in order to log in, right? So we'll have a look, like I said, we'll have a look at it later on in the course. It also provides temporary access for users or devices and services whenever necessary. And a good example of that again is, let's say somebody is using a mobile phone application, and let's say they are storing all their data in your AWS account, and you want them to do that, you want them to access that only when they're using the app itself. So when they're logged out of the app, they should not have any access, right? So it's temporary access. That's how you're going to achieve it with the help of IAM, right? It also allows you to set up your own password rotation policy, right? So you may want your users to, rotate their passwords every 3 months or every 3 weeks. It's entirely up to you, right? And it integrates with many different AWS services, like I said earlier also, right? So whatever AWS services you're using, they might want to use IAM at some point in time. So basically, it helps in integration of all these AWS services. It also supports PCI DSS compliance. So what is this PCI DSS compliance? It's just basically a compliant framework that if you're, let's say, taking a credit card details and you're storing it, so you need to basically be compliant with the framework, this PCI DSS framework, right? So IAM supports PCI DSS compliance as well. After that, we are going to look at some of the key terminologies that we're going to look at in IAM. Really, 4 key terms are there that we really need to learn. And one of them is users. So this is simply just the end users, such as people, employees of an organization, etc., right? So basically, this is a user. So user you can give to any particular person. So it's like a let's say a user within your HR department, users within your finance department, users within your IT department, or something like that, right? So these users can log in either to the AWS console, that means it's a console-based access, or they can log into the CLI, right? So we'll have a look at all these things that I'm mentioning as we progress. But at a high level, I'm just telling you, so if it's a console-based access, you basically have a username and a password with which the users would be logging in. On the contrary, if it's a CLI-based access, you're going to have something called as access keys and secret access keys, right? Which you'll be sharing with your users, and they'll use those access keys and secret access keys to log into their accounts. So basically, this is what users are, and we then have groups. So this is a collection of users, right? So each user in the group will inherit the permissions of that group, right? So you might have a group that is able to access S3, and you might have another group that's able to access EC2. So as long as that user in that group, so as long as that user is within that group, that user will inherit the permissions of that group. So for example, let's say you have a department, HR department, right? So that all the people in that HR group need to have basically access to one particular part in an S3 bucket, right? You'll give this group a permission just to that particular part of the S3 bucket, or whatever you want to give access, right? Then if a new joinee joins into that HR department, you just have to add him to the HR group, and all the permissions that are associated with that particular group, HR group, that particular user will inherit those permissions, right? And he'll have access to just that particular part of the S3 bucket, or whatever you've allowed in that group, right? We then have something called as policies. So policies are made up of these things called as documents, policy documents to be precise, right? And these documents are formatted in JSON, so JavaScript object notation language, And I'll show you how that looks on like, later on in the course. And it basically gives you permissions on what a user, what a group, and what a role is able to do. So policies are your permissions, right? And these permissions you attach to these groups and these roles, and then they're able to basically use them, right? So depending upon whatever things you want to allow, you mention them in these permissions, right? It's like a custom based permission that you create based on the JSON format. You'll have a look at it later on. And then roles. So roles are basically, you create a role, you assign them to an AWS resource, right? And a role is a way of simply allowing one part of AWS to do something with the another part, right? So you might give a virtual machine inside AWS the ability to write files to an S3 bucket. This S3 bucket I've been talking about a lot. So basically, it's just a type of storage within AWS. We're going to look at it later on in detail. S3 is a very big topic, right? So just think of S3 bucket as a sort of a storage that you have within AWS. You use it to store files, right? So we'll look at it in detail on how an EC2 resource or a virtual machine is able to upload and download files from an S3 bucket. So you give that permission to an EC2 instance to be able to talk to that S3 bucket. So we're going to have a look at it later on in the course. So that's coming up, right? So that's all for today. I hope you guys had fun. We'll see you in the next lecture. Thank you.